criticism of the previous government was that there was no centralization, everyone was doing their own thing. The criticism of your government is that there is too much centralization and there is one power center that's driving everything.
Well, I think the previous government had a lot of centralization, but outside the government. Our government...
So you accept that there is a power center that's dictating what every ministry and what every minister ought to do?
In any parliamentary democracy, a prime minister is the natural leader of the government. A cabinet functions around the prime minister. Ministers hold office at the pleasure of the prime minister.
Sure.
He has to have confidence in them. And therefore, to have a strong political leader as a prime minister is a strength of democracy, it's not a weakness. In fact, the weakness of democracy is that you have a prime minister who's like a CEO, but the board of directors sits outside the government. Now, that kind of a system we've experimented for 10 years and it didn't work. And therefore, I'm quite...
But what are the perils of too much centralization?
No, I don't think too much centralization was 1975, where you almost had a
not
cabinet
2014,
system, which was a
not
presidential
2015.
system or a monarchic system. That's not the system that you have today.
Okay, you're saying that's not the system that you have today. Sunil Mittal, as one of his mantras says, you need to get the right people at the right stage of organizational evolution. If I could ask you this in the context of government and how government functions, you know, the Council of Ministers cannot be a meritocracy because of political compulsions. I don't think anybody lives under the illusion of that. But is there no space for a brains trust, for deep specialists to actually work with the government? The hope was that the Niti Aayog would fulfill that responsibility or that role. I'm not commenting on who is in the Niti Aayog or not, but my question is there no space for specialists to work with the government, especially in this phase of execution where we need to look at what happens to education 10, 20 years down the line, what happens to skills 20 years down the line? You need an out-of-the-box approach. You need a new way of thinking. And that doesn't seem to be the case even as far as your government is concerned.
You see, you need specialists. You can have specialists from within the civil service. You can have specialists in bodies like the Niti Aayog. You can have it in other advisory bodies, people who advise government. But then as far as the cabinet is concerned, you have to have elected people.
Sure.
And therefore, in the name of specialists, the unelected really cannot run a system. Unelected can only advise the government. They can guide the government.
Sure.
And every government has its own kind of people, friends, admirers, advisors, insiders, outsiders.
But can there not be an institutional
mechanism?
mechanism, Mr. Jaitley, as opposed to friends and advisors? You know, if I could quote to you...
That's not the system that you have in India, where you can have an unelected person as a part of the government. A government must necessarily have an elected
If I could quote to you the outgoing CEO of Vodafone, who recently did an interview with me, and he said very often the Indian government makes policies that are not in the best interest of the sector or even in the best interest of the country. And that seems to be a problem that we're faced with sector after sector. And it's in that context that I ask you my question.
You see, I think that's an extreme statement, because you see, irrespective of the government in power, governments can go wrong, but governments consciously, no government would act in what in its own wisdom is something not in the interest of the country. Government can go wrong, companies go wrong.
Sure.
And therefore, I don't think this whole trial system of a particular decision, exploring new fields, can really be considered as governments deciding wrongly on a deliberate basis itself. After all, within the government, there is a settled system where there's a lot of consultation which takes place. There's a lot of accountability that the governments have. There's a lot of discussion in parliament, outside parliament, in the media that takes place, which finally culminates into a decision.
You know, another question that I want to ask you, and I think through the course of the stories that we've read in the book, this tendency of the government to micromanage. Okay, you can fly to a certain area, you will have to fill a number of seats if you fly to a certain area, and only then we will allow you to fly international. You can open a store in a certain area, you will be able to store Swedish meatballs or not store Swedish meatballs. I mean, this is 2015, Mr. Jaitley. You want to tell corporates where to spend their money, how to spend their money, what to spend their money in the garb of corporate social responsibility.
Let me take you on to the first illustration that you gave. This is 2015, and therefore in 2015, taking your example, every area should be connected. And therefore, if somebody looks only at India and the large size of Indian population, 1/6 of the world population, and wants to enter India and say, I want to make India my hub so that I get the Indian flag and I fly all over the world. But then I am not interested in flying to Srinagar, I am not interested in flying to Manipur, I am not interested in flying to some other remote Sikkim. And therefore, these are all areas that you must connect yourself to. Any prudent government, any responsible government, any elected government, and any government which responds to the people will have to then think of Manipur, will have to think of how Agartala is to be connected, and will have to think of 20 other factors. It's only the unelected, and here I refer to your earlier question, who'd think that commercially it is prudent only to fly to New York and not to Agartala. But then India in 2015 remains a complex puzzle. And therefore, to relate to that complexity of India, you must actually relate to the ground realities of India.
So you want to...
So the policy is not as absurd as the expert may point it out.
My point to you, Mr. Jaitley, is that you can very clearly articulate and say, well, if you choose to do this, you can fly. But if the government believes that this should not be the policy, 5/20 should stay or not stay, be clear about that. Why impinge on a commercial decision because you want regional connectivity?
You see, you impinge on commercial decisions because the commercial growth of the country and the economic growth of the country, the investment of the country also must have an equity behind it. You can't have a situation. Now look at what, and this is a statement our government keeps repeating. Just draw a line through the middle of India. Bulk of the economic activity is to the west of India and not to the east of India. You have some of the richest states to the east of India. Look at Jharkhand, look at Orissa, to some extent even West Bengal. Now these are all states which have a huge amount of natural resource, mineral, coal. And surprisingly, your economic activity is only to the west of India. And to the east of India, you have much higher levels of poverty. And therefore, would it not be prudent then to tie your commercial decisions with this consideration of social equity, that yes, we'll allow you to mine there provided you set up an industry there so that the east of India develops. We'll allow you to mine there provided the entire money coming from that mineral auction goes to those eastern states. That's a part of any responsible governance.
But Mr. Jaitley, let me ask you this in terms of misplaced priorities. And Sohail was talking about the 50 shades of grey. And I'm drawing parallels here between government functioning and corporations, because very often corporations also have misplaced priorities in terms of the strategic decisions that they make, and very often governments also have misplaced priorities in terms of the decisions that they take. Really, is this, in the current context, when you actually have an agrarian crisis, when you actually have trouble across the north and the western parts of India in the farms, to talk about banning beef, to talk about Marathi cinema being made mandatory in cinema halls in Maharashtra, does it not reek of a sense of misplaced priorities?
Well, I'm given to understand this was a decision taken some 10 years ago. It's only that news channels realized it yesterday when somebody reaffirmed it. And therefore, your own ignorance can't refer to it as a priority. So, therefore, in a state, if because of their own language people had a priority, Tamil Nadu may have its own, West Bengal may have its own. If Maharashtra took a decision 10 years ago when some other government was in power, it's just that the minister reaffirmed it yesterday.
But you don't think that this is a case of misplaced priorities?
Well, I don't think it's a case of priority because it doesn't run contrary to any other economic priority or decision making that the government has. It doesn't affect my functions as far as management of the economy is concerned. It's certainly an occasion for somebody to put it up as a big news item.
Okay. So what gives you hope personally today?
Well, there are several factors. I think the first and most important factor is that in the last few years, what was probably a low phase for us as far as the economy is concerned, I think that's over. Secondly, the kind of decisions which have been taken over the last 1 year, if I put it in a nutshell, opening ourselves entirely for investment,
right,
opening newer areas for investment, unleashing ourselves in areas which had come to a standstill.
Right. And
therefore, all these decisions from insurance to defense to mining to coal to this new impetus on infrastructure, particularly a lot of money going into highways, railways, I've today cleared a proposal for both these sectors to have a large investment by way of tax-free bonds, which I announced in the budget. And a series of these decisions, I think they're going to generate a lot of economic activity. Now, as it is, the Indian normal, as far as growth is concerned, is not 4%, 5%, where any other part of the world would be very excited about it. The second important aspect is that most other competing destinations for investment are facing challenging and difficult situations themselves. So whether it's Brazil or it's South Africa or it's Europe, Japan, even the new Chinese normal is no longer 9%.
7.5%. Yeah.
It's around 7%.
Yeah.
And therefore, for an economy like India, which is currently targeting about an 8% growth rate and eventually targeting a little higher growth rate, in this renewed environment, I think probably the roadmap does indicate that we are going to do much better than what we have in the recent past.
But what gives you the most hope?
Well, a series of factors. I think Indian entrepreneurship is of a very high level. And therefore, if we can provide that environment to the Indian entrepreneur, they're going to do extremely well. Secondly, the government is committed to a particular roadmap. And therefore, just because somebody gets together and says, I'll block this reform, I'm quite willing, I've said this repeatedly, let this be an ideological or a parliamentary struggle between reform and obstruction. I have not the least doubt that reform is going to succeed at the end of the day. And therefore, those who want to be on the side of the obstruction can be there. But that's not, we've seen it in the last session of Parliament. Despite obstruction, I got the insurance through, I got mining through, I got coal through. And I'm quite certain that important challenges like the GST, the Companies Act, the kind of taxation reforms which we are making. It's not very easy in India to force a situation like the GST and indirect tax, or to bring down the direct tax corporate rates down to 25%. Well, we are fairly determined to go on that road track.
So let me end by asking you, Mr. Jaitley, and I'll ask Sohail as well. If you were given a chance to sort of do things over again, would you be a lawyer, a politician, or an entrepreneur?
You know, I've always wondered which is the best life. And I think it is to be a Sohail Seth.
Which category does he fall into?
I don't know. I don't think he fits into any of these categories. He wakes up every morning as a very happy man. He spends his day, he's full of life. He makes us enjoy himself. In fact, the only chapter missing in this book is the mantra of his success. Because a lot of people wonder what he really does to have achieved this position.
That gives us the perfect ending, Sohail said. What is your mantra for success? And what exactly do you do?
I'm actually advising the Niti Aayog on nomenclature to change it to the Planning Commission.
All right, gentlemen, it's been an absolute pleasure. Thank you so much, Mr. Jaitley, for fielding all our questions. And to Sohail, congratulations. Thank you very much.